Have you ever told someone to let it go? As coaches, facilitators, and friends, we sometimes say that statement to someone that we feel may be stuck emotionally or mentally. We want to support them and we say something like, just let it go. What I found over the years is that telling someone to let it go doesn't work because something happens to their physiology and it makes it impossible for them to actually let it go. When we tell someone to let it go, they get stuck in their head. There's actually a part of the brain that's called the PCC, posterior cingulate cortex. And that chip becomes overactive, which keeps them cerebral and stuck in their head. They wonder, how do I let it go? And that's even if they're willing to let it go. Letting go is not a cerebral process, it's a visceral process. So if we're stuck in the head, we don't have a chance at letting go, which is allowing stuck emotion to become energy in motion. Also, when we tell someone to let it go, they pick up that we are judging them. And most of us have had instances of rejection and abandonment in our past. And so we have those cellular memories. And when someone feels that they're not being completely accepted, because, if we accept them, we would just not have a need to tell them to let it go, right? Those cellular charges get active and their vibration constricts and their visceral body becomes a bottleneck and they're not able to let it go. And so put those elements together, what happens is their fight, flight, freeze nerves get activated, adrenaline and cortisol pumps into their blood, and their physiological state will be a state in which letting go is literally impossible. So when I learned that, and I really got that, I said to myself, I'm not going to tell someone to let it go. I am, however, going to work on the art and science of letting go within myself, because that is a good skill to have. And we can work on letting go in a very effective way if we're working within ourselves. So, so many of us are on a path of wanting to continuously grow and be on purpose. And every day there are circumstances that could push our buttons or pour salt on our wounds, or even wounds that have healed, have scar tissue. And some circumstances can tear into the scar tissue and residual feelings can come up. And so if we want to continue on our path and not experience constant stagnation and plateau and even going backward, we have to learn to deal with those instances where those things are happening within us. And the best way to do it is to learn to let it go within ourselves. So first, let's talk about the science of letting go. I'd like to begin with the cervical spine. The cervical spine has 7 vertebrae. The first vertebrae is called the atlas. The atlas is this amazing vertebrae holding up the globe of the skull. In fact, the word atlas came from the Greek god Atlas, who's holding up the globe. And so this vertebrae is important. And in order for us to have an optimal inner space for the letting go process, we want to make sure that, when we are in the instances of trying to let it go, that our chin is parallel to the floor, because that supports the optimal angle between the atlas and the skull. The second part we want to know about is the axis, the second vertebrae. The axis has a spine of its own. It's called the odontoid, and it rotates inside the atlas. It rotates either laterally, which means left or right, or goes posterior, back. If we are in the process of letting go, we want to make sure that we are not retracting our cervical spine into a posterior position, because when we do that and the odontoid goes posterior, it cuts the energy flow and the nerve impulses between the brain and the heart and makes the letting go process become challenging. So, you may have had instances where somebody said something and your inner walls came up and your posture changed and you did something like this. Like somebody said something and you're like, what? So that right there is a coping mechanism. In fact, the odontoid is going posterior to cut the flow between the heart and the brain so that you can think about surviving. But letting go in its essence is important for thriving. So what we want to do is we want to rise beyond those obsolete evolutionary behaviors. And That's important to know about the axis and the odontoid. Now, 3 other vertebrae in the cervical spine, there are C3, 4, and 5. And there's a nerve with 2 branches that's called the phrenic nerve that comes out of C3, 4, and 5, comes down and goes into the diaphragm. In the scientific community, there's a statement that we say, and that is C3, 4, and 5 keep the diaphragm alive. You can say the short version of it, C3, 4, and 5, keep me alive. And the practical application of that is that when we relax our neck muscles, again, energy flows through the phrenic nerve into the diaphragm, and it allows the contraction and the expansion of the diaphragm to occur with more ease, supporting the inhalation and the exhalation process, which is an essential element for letting go. So the next time you feel like you're stuck and you can't let it go, just say to yourself, C3, 4, and 5, keep me alive. And so with that, just allow a breath. Good. Now let's talk about some science of the thoracic spine. The thoracic spine has 12 vertebrae, and most of our fight, flight, freeze nerves are branching out of the thoracic vertebrae. In fact, most of the fight, flight, freeze nerves are in fact in the heart space, which I always find like interesting, because if the fight, flight, freeze nerves are active, the heart space is closed. The only way for the heart space to open up is for us to not be in the sympathetic nervous system, is to be in the parasympathetic, to be in ease, not fight, flight, freeze. And so what are we gonna do to make that happen? You know, I have to talk about the art in a moment. Yet that's important to know, that, you know, I have to do something actively in order for my fight, flight, freeze nerves that are mostly in the thoracic spine to be calm, cool, and even dormant. Okay. Now let's come into the lumbar spine. The lumbar spine, which completes itself in the sacrum, is a really important part of our spine. In fact, the word sacrum came from the word sacred. And it's ancient knowing that the wisdom energy resides around the sacrum, and the sacrum is this physical structure to support it. So sacrum, sacred energy, one of the things we can do is make sure that we are not sitting on our sacrum, because, you know, we sit so many hours a day at our computer, at our desk. And so always remind yourself, sacred energy, don't sit on your sacrum. If you're sitting on your sacrum, your posture looks like this. But if you're not sitting on your sacrum, your sacral pump is unobstructed. Energy flows in, through, around, and again back up into the rest of your spine, and you know, allows that wisdom energy to be accessible to you. Okay, and so if you're not sitting on your sacrum, you should be feeling a natural stature in your spine. Okay, so now let's talk about some energetic elements. The energy that is around the lumbar and the sacrum is related to evaluating circumstances. And because we have spent thousands of years developing our survival way of thinking, we often evaluate circumstances based on fear. We're like, you know, what's the danger that's around? Who's going to abandon me? How can I prevent rejection? How can I make sure that I survive? So a lot of lack, a lot of fear, and all of that is based on that evaluation that we do in evaluating circumstances in and around the sacrum and the lumbar spine. Now, when we are evaluating circumstances based on fear, we don't have access to gravitas energy that's naturally available around the sacrum, and grit energy that's naturally available around the lumbar spine. So if we don't have natural gravitas and grit, we are going to overcompensate as a coping mechanism, which means we are going to either push or hold back. That creates dis-ease, and dis-ease chronically over time contributes to disease. And there are a lot of challenges with uterine and prostate in women and men, and so a contributing factor is that kind of dis-ease. Now, in the thoracic spine, if we are not really tuning into that thoracic spine energy and we're not opening it up, we are often in judgment. Judgment about ourselves, judgment about our life circumstances. In fact, in many deep cellular and subconscious ways, we attack our life from our thoracic spine. And that dis-ease over time can contribute to rising rates of heart attack. Now, we experience emotion in our thoracic spine. So based on how we evaluated circumstances in our lumbar and sacrum, we experience those emotions. If the emotions are high vibe, the fight, flight, freeze nerves are relaxed and dormant, and we are in the parasympathetic. We are in ease. The vagus nerve is leading. We are feeling good about life and about ourselves. Now, moving up to the cervical spine, this is where we express thought. So remember, we evaluated circumstances in the sacrum and the lumbar, we experienced emotions in the thoracics, and we expressed thought through the cervical. If we're evaluating circumstances based on fear, we're experiencing low vibrational emotions, and we are expressing through fear. A lot of people are afraid to communicate, so fear of communicating, and some communicate, yet communicate with fear. That also creates dis-ease, and that dis-ease over time creates different aspects of disease, and in fact it could mess up the balance in the thyroid, which adversely affects our metabolism and our immunity. So, relaxing our neck and allowing the flow to come into the heart, opening up the chest, and sitting up with some stature, not on the sacrum, supports an optimal state for letting go. Now, a visualization that may be helpful is this. Visualize, when you want to let go, visualize that there's an airplane in your mind field, and there's a lot of chaos, and the airplane is there, and you're like, okay, I want to let go. So you are a skydiver, and you dive out of that airplane, and you descend physiologically toward your heart. Now, even though it's a physiological descend, it's an energetic ascend, because you're coming toward the heart, and that opens grace energy. And then you're coming down and you get to the thoracic spine and the parachute opens up, and you are grateful that the parachute opens up every time. And so you feel that gratitude energy, and you're feeling that parachute coming down your thoracic spine, and then you start to feel more confidence and grit, and you start to feel gravitas and gravity bringing you down toward the sacrum, on which you land on your feet in a grounded way. Yes. And that visualization can be supportive in the process of letting go. Watch the video again and implement some of the elements until it becomes more viscerally intuitive for you. Cheers to letting go.